All right, folks hear me? Virtual world. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Government Transition Advisory Committee. Today is Tuesday, June 20th, and we will be here from 6 to 8 p.m. Committee members and community members listening in, welcome to the 5th meeting of the Government Transition Advisory Committee. My name is Julia Meyer. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Engagement and Community Participation Manager for the transition. Co-chairing tonight are David and Lori. Next slide, please. Well, this slide is now off. So it is a hybrid meeting. There are some of us in person at the Portland building, and folks can participate virtually via Zoom. This meeting is being recorded, and a copy of the recording will be posted on the transition webpage. I'm hoping, so we had some issues with Zoom about 15 minutes ago. This should normally would be a webinar, but it is in fact a regular meeting. So a few of us are co-hosts, and we'll kind of try to work out problems along the way. What I would say for committee members, if you can change your chat settings to everyone's, so, well, I guess everyone could see it anyway. Sorry, I'm thinking through what the differences are here. So to community members in participating virtually, we normally have the Q&A function on in a webinar. There is no Q&A function in a regular meeting. I would ask that you probably not use the chat unless it's something urgent. You're having a hard time accessing the meeting, so we can keep the chat to a public record of the committee conversation. I will say at today's meeting, we do have some time for public comment. So if folks here in person or virtually want to give public comment, that'll still be fine. You can raise your hand if you're here virtually, and we can call on you. And I think that is it for the differences. Yeah, just let me know if anyone has a problem, drop it in the chat. I will just remind folks that hybrid meetings allow us to meet people where they're at. It can also be a bit challenging sometimes. I found that particularly true the one time I participated virtually when people in this room were talking to each other without being called on. It was really hard to hear. So just try to be conscientious about that and mute yourself. Maybe the last.
We also need to mute.
So distracted.
The meeting volume.
Thank you. And then one more thing I'll note, and we'll maybe over here try to remind folks if you forget, is that sometimes for folks watching virtually, you can't always see the person speaking, and people may not know who you are. And we've gotten a couple requests for this. So if you think about it, I may need some reminding myself, say, hi, I'm David, Commissioner, and share your thoughts. It makes it easier for folks in community to follow along. Okay, I think we're caught up on logistics. If you go to the next slide, I'm going to turn it over to Lori to go over tonight's agenda.
Okay, for tonight, our meeting agenda includes the first 10 minutes where we'll go over committee business, which will entail us reviewing the working agreements that we all agreed to last time. Then we've got time for public comment and committee engagement. And we've got the two big items for the agenda tonight. The first one is the community engagement plan. And then the second one is going over code 3.02, the council organization and procedures. We'll end with next steps and then adjourn the meeting. Next slide, please. We had a couple excused absences, and then next I'd like to go over the working agreements. If you'd like to go to the next slide, please. We thought it'd be helpful to go over these every time before we start the meeting. So I'm just going to read through them and hopefully you can follow along. So the first one, in discussions, challenge ideas rather than individuals, offer constructive suggestions. Approach different opinions with curiosity and seek to understand. Keep the needs and concerns of the local community and the larger region at the forefront of the work. Arrive on time, be prepared to the best of your ability. Let the group know if you're unable to attend a meeting. The co-chairs will aim to incorporate tools for breathers. Keep multitasking to a minimum. Keep focus on the objectives of the meeting. Utilize co-chairs to note additional topics for discussion by submitting topics in writing via email. Next slide, please. Honor the decisions of the group. Contribute to the overall success of the group by finding ways to participate that best meets your needs. Step up and step back. Collectively work to ensure that every member who wants to be heard is heard. Embrace conflict and work with your fellow committee members and staff to find ways to give each other feedback. The co-chairs will aim to incorporate various feedback tools. And lastly, use I statements. Next slide, please. Back to Julia.
Thank you. So we are now on public comment. Folks were invited to sign up ahead of time, as always. We had one person sign up who's here with us. I know, I'll get to you in one sec. And then when she's done, we do have some other time, so we'll just wait a minute to see if anyone in person or virtually wants to provide some comment. But as a reminder, you can always provide written comment through our website or by email or by calling 311. Testifiers have 3 minutes to testify, and I'll keep track and just ping you when your 3 minutes is over. And so first we have Win Firth. And Win, if you want, you can come sit at my seat so folks can see you, and I'll move.
Thank you, Julia.
Got this.
It's a pleasure to be here in a room with you. My name is Win Firth, and I'm here to speak to your agenda item about Code 302, City Council rules. And specifically, I'm here to suggest that you take advantage of the fact that we don't need these rules until January of 2025. That's 18 months from now. Yet your schedule right now calls for getting this to City Council in 3 months, having a rather quick public review process, followed by something called phase 2, and that seems confusing for the public and unlikely to yield optimal results. So I wanted to suggest that you front load the process and you aim instead for, first, enough time for staff and you to develop a really solid recommendation and report that not only says, here's where we landed, but here's how we got here. A killer proposal, basically. If you say we're relying on best practices, says who? Where'd you find them? Why do you think they're the best? Is there a GTAC working group on this? I don't know. Would it be a good idea? Could be useful. Second, that you have a written comment period that gives us at least 6 weeks to engage with this document. This document not only has to make sense internally, but it's in the municipal code, it's in the chart, it's got to be consistent with the charter, state law, federal law. Based on my lifetime doing this, it's going to need debugging. And that's nothing like a really good review by a lot of people who've been thinking about these things from different points of view. And third, you give yourselves time to research what people come up with. I don't think it's really sunk into us how new this is going to be. The update report says many new councilors will begin office under a new form of government. Well, no, every single person in that room is going to be working under a new form of government, and all the people outside the room too. You know, a quick look at the materials raised some questions, like the charter amendment says a quorum is 7 people at any meeting. This proposal asks for 9 votes. How are you going to do that with a quorum of 7? Why propose complicated rotating roll calls when you can have software that just locks in everybody's vote? Clerk flips the switch, they all show up at once, reduces gamesmanship, saves time. Our election system is designed to give more people a space at the table, but that doesn't matter a lot if you can't get an item on the agenda. Well, right now, any counselor can get an item on the agenda, but there's just 4 of them and the mayor. What's the good balance when you have 12 between access and the fact that time is really short and energy and intelligence? Do we need a rule explicitly saying that counselors can't intervene in administrative affairs? Really common in city manager, city administrator, strong mayor cities. And if we do have that rule, how do people take care of their constituents? I think there's just lots of opportunity for really good work here. And I suggest you give yourselves enough time to do it.
That was exactly that.
I practiced. Thank you so much, Wynn. So I just want to pause for a moment and see if anyone else wants to give verbal public comment. And you can just go ahead and raise your hand.
Fred. Go ahead, Fred.
Thank you. I do have a hearing problem, and I won't apologize again, but Fred Neal here, but there's an echo.
You're not stressed out. I just want to make sure everybody heard. knows.
Yes, Fred Neal. There's an echo on mine. I don't know if anyone else in this, like, because are we all supposed to be muted? Someone else is speaking and we're not.
I'm going to just check to make sure you're muted. It is very hard to hear when you're getting an echo back.
Thank you. Lori, are you muted?
Can I interrupt for just a moment to do a business? Derek, can you assign him as host so that he can figure out how to do interpretation? Because I don't see the capability, but sorry.
So thank you for that. Go to the next slide. So yeah, if folks remember at our last meeting, we started to see a slide that looks like the one on the screen where we're just sharing high level the number of public comments received in a month and the percentage of comments about certain topics that we code. The April column and the May column are new since our last meeting a couple of weeks ago. In April, the highest percentage was on ranked choice voting. It was less than 50% of the overall comments, and it was also a month of relatively low public comment. As a reminder for folks, April is the month we took the revised city code on the election of candidates, which describes ranked choice voting to city council. That's what you see that bump for. Otherwise, the next highest one was geographic districts. And then you look at May and it kind of looks like March, 90% of the public comments were about geographic districts. And I will say the full May public comment report will probably be on the website later this week, early next week, where you can read the public comments in their entirety. Next slide, please. So this next slide is one that you have not seen before, but you will begin to see it every meeting. It'll probably look different over time as there's more data to share. So as a reminder, all committee members have a responsibility to track the engagement and education work you do outside of our public meetings. It's important that we know who we're talking to, but it's also important that we report this data so community knows who you are talking to, right? And who may be influencing your thinking and decisions. So that is an engagement tracking form. It's very simple and easy to fill out. It's in your shared folder. It's just a handful of questions. And you do one each time you do education and engagement. So far, I've gotten filled out forms from 5 committee members. I imagine some of you have done engagement that is not on this slide. That's okay, but you need to go back and track it. And if you forget the date and you want to say early March, that's okay, right? But please try to make every effort to retroactively log all of the education and engagement that you've done and keep doing that moving forward. I think having us report on it in meetings will maybe help trigger you, which is one of the reasons I'm bringing it now. We're not going to spend time right now talking through this, but in upcoming meetings, we'll probably ask some folks, hey, Joe, share what happened at that meeting that you went to, that you logged on an engagement tracker. So just as a reminder, if you have any problems with it, reach out to me. But the further you go without tracking it, the harder it is, right? As for all of us, you have to go back and try to remember what we did. So please sit with it, and deep appreciation for folks that have done engagement outside of our meetings and have logged it. It really does make a difference. So thank you for that. And I believe,
Joe's got a question.
yes, sir.
Maybe everybody else knows this already, but should we notify someone in advance before we do these, or just after the fact, or what's the protocol?
I think it depends, what it is. I mean, and even when you look at the top of this engagement tracker form, it's going to say, please use your discretion, right? I mean, there are a lot of sort of lines here that we will figure out our own norms together as a group over time. I think that, I guess I have found so far as examples, some of these people have told me about ahead of time, mainly because they wanted my advice on what to present, had questions about where the presentation was, like what the talking points were, just some basic logistics questions. Some of these I did not hear about ahead of time that I think are deeper, maybe relationships in some sense, where it's like, oh, I'm already on this group and I was there and we did have some dedicated time talking about the transition or the government transition advisory committee. So I'm always here to help. Like if you have questions and you want help, like please reach out, but it's also okay for you to go do engagement and log it after.
And I just say, Joe, I really encourage you to reach out because, or anybody before you, just there's resources, there's people that are willing to, Lori helped me with my last presentation. She was invaluable. You know what I mean? Just reach out. This is not an attempt to micromanage, but there are things that, people ask tricky questions. A lot of times you'll find things that, like there were questions I didn't know the answers to, but Lori did because she stepped up and was able to this me. So please just reach out because we're here to support you guys.
And one other thing, later on, we're going to talk about this, but it talked about going in pairs. And if we get an invitation, should we try to bring another member of the committee with us?
I would really encourage that. Unless you're confident and you know who who your audience is, but I would always encourage that.
Okay, next slide, please. I am going to turn it over to Jose and Zach from the Community Engagement Work Group to introduce this next agenda item.
I'm just going to go ahead and I'll introduce myself and then have Jose introduce himself. I'm Zach, was part of the work group, and just a reminder for everybody, we formed this work group. It's a time-limited community engagement work group for the sole purpose of drafting a transition-wide community engagement plan for the committee's consideration. So what we're presenting today is what you received by email last week. I just want to also take a moment to recognize those who contributed in the work group. Thank you to Terry, Jose, Jane, Leah, Bill K, Juanita, Amy R, Destiny, and Bill F. Next slide. So this is just some brief context for why we're talking about the city's community engagement plan. When City Council established our advisory committee, they defined our responsibilities as follows. The responsibilities that pertain to community engagement are bold on the screen. So I'm just going to read some of these out. The responsibilities included maintaining open, consistent communication and engagement with internal and external stakeholders, ensuring input is meaningfully integrated, serving as the primary solicitor and repository of public input related to the transition, and advising the city on the community education and engagement plan. And in accordance to the last point, our work group met twice already. We're going to meet a third time to discuss the community engagement plan in detail. We're now seeking feedback from the broader committee. Next slide. Okay, so here's a snapshot of the schedule for the community engagement plan adoption. Last week, you received that draft plan. We also posted it online on Transition's website under the meetings event information. Committee members have been asked to do two things by this Thursday, which is June 22nd. First, please provide any written comment on the draft plan to the co-chairs, David and Lori. Pause for a second. First, please provide any written comment on the draft plan to the co-chairs, David and Lori, as well as Julia. We particularly want to know what is missing, if there's anything, and if we're off track with the plan. And second, please populate the shared organizational spreadsheet by adding organizations and noting with whom you have relationships and intend to engage. This will help us in coordinating our outreach as well as identifying any deficiencies we may have in connecting with the hardest to reach communities that we want to prioritize. So the work group will convene one more time next Monday. That's going to be taking in that feedback that we received from you on Thursday. And then any community member is welcome to join us if you would like. On July 3rd, then we'll be distributing the revised plan and post it online before presenting to the full committee on July 10th. And at that meeting, we'll be making a specific ask to the committee to consider voting on recommending this plan to the city's chief administrative officer. Ultimately, it's the chief administrative officer who will have the responsibility to adopt the engagement plan. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Jose.
Hi, I'm Jose. I'm also part of the work group. Next slide, please. We spent the bulk of our work obviously talking about how to engage the community and what to talk about. We recognize that most of the engagement was really going to be in three main areas: general education, how is ranked choice voting going to work, or when and where to share input, like when are people going to be able to make public comment, or decision points, like the conversation later today with code revisions, things like that. So general education, public comment, and decision points. So the draft plan really goes into a lot of that. At the end of that draft plan, there's a proposal of a calendar, and you'll see an example of one of the months up on the screen right now. It has all the public meetings and the hearings, city engagement, all the different things that are happening, and also proposed government transition advisory committee focus. With the star, you'll see that for this month, it's districting and the salaries, because that's really what is going on right? Districting is everywhere because they're trying to figure out exactly what's going to happen. So most of our questions are going to be with whatever is important at the moment. So every month we'll have a column with the star that has the things that we should really know or stuff on. That's where our questions are really going to come up from. The next slide. So these are some of the example questions that have been identified. There's often going to be questions that we've set up in there just so that we know what to expect. There's always going to be questions that are the mostly that are going to come out. It's not the only questions, but you should know these really well. We, of course, the Independent District Commission will send input and they will identify some specific questions they particularly want feedback and pass those on to us so that we can give them feedback and so that we know what to answer those questions. All the questions on the slide are just an example and they're not the final questions from the Independent District Commission, but it's just an example to show what kind of things will be attached every month depending on what the focus is going to be. And we're only mentioning this so you know when committee members begin doing engagement in the community, you will often be giving those questions, and that will help you just do the activity. It's kind of makes it so you're not going blind. You'll have something to go in with. Next slide, please. When we distributed the draft plan, we asked that you paid particular attention to the role of the Government Transition Advisory Committee section. That section notes that while this committee will participate in and support city-hosted education and engagement opportunities, the committee recognizes that inviting people to city events is insufficient, particularly to hard-to-reach communities. The committee really has to go out into the community and engage people where they are to get the most people engaged. The work group is proposing that at minimum, the committee commit to the following. Every 3 months from now until February 2025, committee members and alternates working in pairs will provide at least 2 education or engagement opportunities in community beyond city-hosted events, totaling 126 education and engagement opportunities. At least one of the 2 quarterly opportunities be provided in partnership with a community or communities that have been traditionally left out of City Hall and city decision-making, including Black, Indigenous, Asian, Pacific Islander, Latina, or Latinx, people of color, people with disabilities, immigrants, refugees, non-English speaking communities, people under the age of 25, homeless, houseless Portlanders, people who live east of 82nd Avenue, and the LGBTQIA community. To support the committee in this work, all committee members and alternates are required to take a racial justice and equity training provided by the Office of Equity and Human Rights to support culturally responsive engagement, and committee members will be provided with the trainings to use in engagement, materials to use in engagement. Now turn it back to the co-chairs to facilitate a discussion on the proposal and anything that Saginaw shared.
At this point, we just open it up for discussion. Does anyone have feedback on this proposal?
Yeah.
Excellent. Go ahead, Fred.
Thank you. How would the outside engagement opportunities, the ones beyond city hosted events, be generated by the individual committee members or staff, or based on the organizations we identify with, or what?
I think it's going to come from a variety of places. There will be organizations that reach out to us and want presentations. A lot of it, we have relationships with a lot of different organizations. Like for instance, one of the slide when we're talking about engagement and the engagement log. Mine was with Paul Hurst-Gilbert because I'm the co-chair at the My Neighbor Association. So we had a discussion. And from that discussion about GTAC and districting, I was able to gauge, okay, we need a presentation from districting. So I reached out to Sophia and set something up more formal. So that kind of thing will happen. You'll talk to groups, you'll talk to people, and we'll get opportunities that way. So I think a lot of it will come organically. But also we might need to reach out. If we at a certain point, we talked about, if we don't see that XYZ organizations, specifically of those minority groups aren't getting this information, we might have to take it upon ourselves to go out and offer this information to them. And we think that's important because those groups that have historically always felt left out of the city and the decisions the city is making, sometimes are weary on reaching out. So we'll have to do the work of reaching out ourselves.
And I know from some of the stuff that we've done, some of it is like I've sat in rooms before and made presentations and somebody else said, hey, this would be really great if you would come to us and do a presentation. And also as well as reaching out to people, I know I work with a lot of nonprofits that want to get in on this. I work with the Black community here in Portland. And I definitely want to have some conversations and presentations with. So, there's going to be a huge, just kind of there's going to be some of the city doing it, and a lot of it's going to come from us as well. I know one of the things that we got chosen for was some of our reach into what communities that we had connections to. Right. Is that correct? So I think we just have there's going to be a lot of us hitting the streets and walking the pavement and,
I think Bill.
Bill, yeah, I think those.
This is Bill Farber. So as I understand it, the focus of these groups is probably about districting and salaries. And I'm wondering why we're being asked to do it rather than the groups that did that work. Because when I looked at those questions on districting, I wouldn't have a clue about how to answer.
So I think the point of the questions and the kind of materials that we're envisioning to support our engagement is to help facilitate the conversation, not for us to necessarily answer and have it be a unidirectional conversation. I do think that there's, your point is understandable that there's like the commission, the independent districting commission, for example, is going to be much more fluent in what's going on in districting than we might be. But we do need to augment our community engagement because when I believe it was our charter commission did a survey, there was just a general request to have more engagement opportunities. And so by having those of us in this room and virtually participating in that engagement in a non-city structured environment, it offers more opportunities for the broader public to engage.
But all that would be true and include the members that were actually engaged in these issues and have developed alternatives to that. They would be in an even better position than we would, I would think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also you got to keep in mind that we are just starting and we're here till 2025 and they're ending. And the questions aren't going to end when they are. And yeah, it's a lot more work for us, but we're the group that is overseeing everything. So we're still going to get questions about districting when districting commission is no longer a thing. So we still have to be aware of some of these questions. And that was just an example for this month. But like I said, with my group, for me, the logical conclusion was to get someone from districting to do a presentation. But in a month or two, that would be an option because they won't be around anymore. So we'll have to have some of that information to be able to answer.
They'll be around, they just won't be functioning as a committee.
But they won't be functional committees, so they might not be up to doing as many of these activities.
We do hands in order.
Yes.
Do you want to?
I can find it. I can't do it. The computer's not working. I'm sorry.
I think I
Yeah.
William was next.
I think Bill.
I'm part of this committee.
Speak up, please.
Sorry.
Problems.
On the committee, what I'm hearing and what I felt on this committee was a fear of not knowing your stuff. There's nothing worse. I mean, getting up in front of a group is hard enough, but you have to feel really, really well prepared. And I think that what this committee will ensure down the line is that everybody will be well prepared. We will go with materials. The city will provide us great materials. And I'm thinking that when I go, I'll go to the Old Town Community Association, Neighborhood Association, because I was affiliated with them for a long time. And I know that they would be kind to me as I was kind of like trying that out. So I think that one of the things that we want to do is we want to find our first trial has got to be an easy one where people won't be hard on you. And we also have to remember that it's also okay to say, I don't know. So we'll get the cheat sheet. We'll learn as much as we can about subjects that we're just ourselves learning about. And we'll have materials and we'll do the best that we possibly can. And then we can say, I don't know, but I can get you that answer. But I do think that when we kind of like look at the timeline, we'll say, okay, once this goes to City Council and it gets in the news, different groups might be interested in hearing about it. So we need to get prepared to be able to kind of hit the ground running. So I think that's one thing that our community outreach group has got to do, is kind of like say, okay, let's get the materials put together here so that we can give you the little briefcase so that you feel bold enough to go do this. And that's why going in twos is a good idea, because you do need to hold hands and hug on the rug. You know, it just feels safer. But we don't know enough. I mean, we heard this last meeting, right? Oh my God, I don't know enough. There's not enough. But I think that once we are charged with going out, we're going to have to just get the speaking points and go do it.
Bill, up next.
Yeah, thank you. This discussion is making me think those talking points or script, that will be very helpful. So it will help us standardize our presentations or be informative. I had an additional question, if I may. With regard to the requirement to take a racial justice and equity training, query, is that the training that we took when we learned we'd be committee members or alternates, and it was part, of the different videos and trainings we took? Or if this is an additional, how do we take this training before we engage in public engagement?
Bill, this is Julia on staff. I can speak to this. So it is something different. So folks were supposed to take a virtual training. It's sort of shared equity language, I think is what it was called, that all advisory body members at the city take. This training will be created specifically for the Government Transition Advisory Committee by the Office of Equity and Human Rights to meet a set of desired outcomes that the community engagement work group is going to discuss on Monday at its meeting. But the idea came out of the community engagement work group that if there is this minimum kind of requirement of half of your non-city hosted engagement being in partnership with a community or communities left out of city hall decision making, there needs then to be provided by the city some education on how best to do that education and engagement in a way that is culturally responsive. So you don't have a link, there's no thing yet. They will make it for you. But I've already talked to the Office of Equity and Human Rights interim director about this. They're happy to help. They're just going to wait on some guidance from us, and then we'll schedule some times to meet folks' availability.
Thank you. Sounds good.
Next up is Joe.
So Joe Hertzberg, he, him, and I've got a question about each of the paragraphs, maybe starting right there. If we're going to get that training, I hope that we can at least have an opportunity to do it together. So it's one more opportunity for us to get together informally. Regarding the first paragraph, when it says we'll provide at least 2 education or engagement opportunities, I presume that means each of us will do 2 in every 3-month period.
Correct.
So we're committing to do 2 each, 3 months, over the course of 3 months. And then the other is regarding working in communities. My experience, and I think it's reflected in here, is the best way to do that is working in partnership with community-based organizations. But it means asking them a lot unless we're going to just show up and present, it seems to me the best way to do it is to reach out to them and ask them the best way to reach their community. And that's going to require staff resources on their time, and their part. It may require food, it may require childcare. And I wonder if there's a budget for things like that. Because if there isn't, there's something here about being extractive. And if we're expecting them to put out without compensation, seems to me that's extractive.
There are sorry, this is Julia and staff. There are resources. There are not infinite, unlimited resources. So I think we need to figure out kind of what folks' needs are. But yes, the idea would be not to extract from community-based organizations.
I will say, in my experience, most of the time when these things happen, you're plugging into an already existing need. You're not asking them to do a special thing for you. So you just take up a bit of their time. That's something they already have planned. So it doesn't take up that.
And the fastest way to do this would be to use low-hanging fruit, already established groups who are in the habit of meeting and what have you, except when we talk about trying to reach hard to reach groups, that's maybe when we have to tap into something a little bit difficult and maybe use other finances.
Just a heads up, we've got 6 minutes left for this agenda topic, so call on a couple more people. Juliet.
So just where it talks about providing opportunities, I've been talking to my neighborhood association. I did not ask them. I told them, I've signed you up. And I saw the president today and I said, let's talk about this again. And I told him, I think we could target these certain audiences. So I'm not really giving them a choice. I'm concerned that, we're going to get down the road, people are going to hear about this and then they're going to be mad. And so I really want to be proactive about it. I don't think my neighborhood association, but someone will, right? And they'll say, we were never told or something. So I'm hoping that that's what it means to provide opportunities, and I'm working on that. And I put in my form to Julia, I'm not sure where to start. Can't see the forest for the trees with all the documents. So where would I start? I would like to start feeding them just some things, start provoking their questions and their interest. And then I'm very interested in the training from Office of Equity. I wonder, is that going to be, I'm with Joe, I'm going to do it in person. Is this going to be live? Is this going to be online? Thank you for taking my time.
Anyone want to answer that one or just take all that into consideration for the committee? Okay,
I don't need an answer right now.
we've got Leah.
This is Leah Benson. Thank you. I just wanted to make a suggestion for us on the Community Engagement Committee to consider. It seems like this is really ripe for a lot of conversation and to share ideas. And I wonder if we might be able to schedule a time that's just dedicated to brainstorming for this and for figuring out how we could go out in pairs. Since we are being asked to do it together, we probably should provide some type of space for that. And I think it'd be nice to do it outside of just like a spreadsheet. So that's just something for us to discuss next week. Thank you.
Money?
Hey y'all, I'm Money here. Thanks to the working group for putting this all together. Just a couple comments that I want to highlight in what I also submitted. I think just providing more detail on it in the presumption that this is for the public to be able to see, if we could maybe put some detail around all these groups that we've named and how we're wanting to engage with them. And we've already been talking about that, whether that be via a CBO connection. Naming a couple CBOs, I think would be helpful for the public to see, and it doesn't have to be an exhaustive list, but just so they see it have more teeth, I think would be maybe appreciated by the public. And then just also explaining what those education engagement opportunities look like, because I could see folks maybe wanting to be a part of planning that, asking how they can get involved. If there's just a little, like a phrase, just a little bit of a description there, I think could be helpful. And I know this isn't up on the screen and don't have to discuss it right now, but I had some questions around the projections that were in the report and kind of what were the baseline numbers for that to then make our projections. Again, just not wanting to overcommit what we're saying and putting out to the world and what we're aiming to complete, since we're all just kind of getting started on this. And then if there's any mechanism that the working group has already thought about of how we were going to get into pairs, or if that should all just be self-initiated, would be good to know.
Got time for one more from Destiny.
Thank you. Just a quick comment of earlier, like, you know, when we're in these communities, things like that, I work with a lot of families for like preschool resources and programs, and there's a lot. And the best referral, the best way to inform a community is word of mouth. So it's the rule of 6, I believe, that any 6 people, anyone you want to get connected to, 6 people, you'll get there. So when we go out to do like answering these questions as we're learning, when we do one presentation that then spreads and things like that. And so really it's about engaging these communities, it's about engaging partners, it's about engaging neighborhoods, schools, families and friends and workplaces, because once one person becomes informed, the next person will. So it's good faith effort. And thank you again, Manny, I believe, Manny, for those asking how we solicited or are compiling a list. It's great to see that a lot of people have different spaces that they're trying to get connected to.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't see where there's feedback from, once we have an engagement. For instance, in the districting, they've already had a chance for public comment. The public comment's done with, I guess, at some point. But we were in a small group, say, my neighborhood association, and somebody has a response to the proposal for, say, salaries or districting. How do I get to just have them guide them to a website where they can make the comments, or what? I don't see where we have community engagement, but I don't see the reciprocities that we bring it back to the city somehow. I don't see us as a committee taking that time to go through each of these responses. And I don't even see where that's accommodated. The other question I have, when I think in community engagement, I think that is included in the city hosted events, which are these listening sessions that we're supposed to attend and be listeners. Those are recorded, I'm sure, and that the comments somehow will be digested by staff. But it's these other engagement opportunities. I don't know where I would feel that I was empowering my neighborhood association. So I wouldn't tell them where to respond to their questions. I won't have all the answers. Certainly I have my own opinions. I'm not going to express those because I don't think that's appropriate as a GTAC member. So I'm still up in the air about that. And so would you ponder that a bit, or do you have a response?
Well, yeah, I think that's in part what our engagement form, it helps us document what questions were asked, what kind of things we were hearing. And then I think I would also encourage with this process is civic engagement and civic learning too, and like how people can maybe anticipate and or learn how to engage with the government in the future. And so training or teaching how to submit public comments, or how else we are going to ensure that their feedback is heard. And so it's not necessarily through a secondhand lens that we would be providing in these engagement forums.
So some written piece that we could take with us that showed those venues or avenues for communication with the city, as opposed to with us or with GTAC, would be useful. When I tried to get into the community engagement form, all I got was a blank spreadsheet, and and it was read only. I couldn't even see where. So I'll talk to Julia about that.
And that's the plan, to have materials that explain how to tell people where to leave public comment and do all those things that you shouldn't just know it off the top of your head,
All
of
right.
your head. That should be provided to you.
Thank you.
Is everyone
Thank you. Yeah.
ready to move on to the next agenda topic? Want to go to the next slide, please? I'd like to introduce transition team members Tate White and Diana Shiplet to talk to us about Code 3.02, Council Organization and Procedure.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I'm so sorry I'm not signed on because I was so engrossed in the conversation and I've been trying to save my battery. But I think everyone can hear me online. No, I'm fine. I'm just not. I have lots of battery now. You know what?
Yeah, same here.
People do not need to see my face. I think it's fine. So good evening, everyone. My name is Tate White. My pronouns are she, they, and I'm a strategic project manager working with the transition team. I'm joined tonight by my illustrious colleague, Diana, who I'll let introduce herself when she takes over the presentation. It's an honor to be here, really. Like, I'm so impressed with how you're working together as a group. And yeah, anyways, I'm in awe, and I've been doing community engagement for over a decade, so it's super impressive. So we are here to talk about updates to the Portland City Code, Chapter 3.02, which outlines the organization and procedures of City Council. I believe you all got some of our materials about a week ago, and I hope you've all had the chance to review those. We have a lot of time on the agenda tonight. Thank you very much. We were thinking that to be most efficient with our time and to allow the most time possible for discussion, we could go through the presentation in full. And so if you have any questions, please jot them down, make note of them, and then we're happy to discuss them at the end. So the transition team, and thank you, Wen, for your comments earlier. The transition team is prioritizing this code update right now because we want it to be completed early enough for anyone wishing to run for office in the November 2024 election to have some clarity about council operations before they register to run. We also really want to make sure the new council is able to successfully hold its first meeting in January 2025. But that does not mean the work needs to stop. We will talk more about phase 2, but that allows us the opportunity to do more work, gather more input, understand things more to make a recommendation to the future council. So next slide, please. So this slide talks more about this phased approach. I will say that this work is so interesting and there's so much to do. I wish I could do everything and dive into it deeply, but that's just not possible right now. We have some limited capacity, so we're trying to be really strategic and really thoughtful with our time. So because of that, we're approaching this with these 2 phases here. So this year, we're going to focus on making the amendments to Chapter 3.02 that are either required by the amended charter or what will make council really successful, like I said, when they start in January 2025. The second phase is to identify, research, and provide recommendations for process improvements and further potential procedural decisions for the 2025 City Council to consider and to make those choices themselves. Next slide, please. So here's a quick overview of our current timeline. We anticipate that a draft version of Chapter 3.02 will be released to the public on or before August 1st. We are planning to have a community education and engagement opportunity in early August, which is tentatively scheduled for August 8th. We would really appreciate your assistance, both in helping to lead the session and in ensuring we are providing community with the appropriate information about the code update and asking the right questions to solicit valuable feedback. We will be meeting again with you on August 14th to discuss what was heard in the community engagement meeting and ways to incorporate that feedback, either in the draft code or in future recommendations. We will be taking the resulting revisions to Chapter 3.02 to City Council on September 20th. Finally, we will spend the months following the update with engaging with you and other experts from cities on additional recommendations that we can give the 2025 City Council so they can consider whether they want to adopt those or not. We will also, so tonight we're going to focus on describing the 4 policy choices that we have identified for this year's update. Next slide, please. So the first major policy choice that we kind of saw as helpful for this year, the new city charter requires that a council president must be elected at the first meeting of the year and that they preside over council meetings. However, the charter doesn't outline any other duties which are common in peer cities with mayor council forms of government, and those other duties are for the council president. The first policy choice asks what other duties should be delegated to the president and what duties should be retained by the council. So next slide, please. This table here shows kind of core duties that we thought would be really useful for the council to operate early. Our preliminary recommendations include having the council president work with the city clerk to finalize the meeting agenda, including ensuring the items on each agenda are timely, that the meeting has an appropriate number of agenda topics for the council to complete in one meeting, and that all items presented have the information necessary for council's consideration. The council president would also assign seats at the dais and sign items approved by the council so they can do their work. Having the president take on these responsibilities ensures that there's accountability and a clear decision maker for these core operational needs. We recommend that the full council make decisions around committees, such as what committees could be created, who should be appointed to them, and what matters should be referred to those committees. Having council make these decisions both helps them develop working relationships across the districts and also ensures that a majority determines council policy priorities. We felt this balance of power was particularly important, given that the council president will be elected from a district and not citywide. Slide, please. So a few of the recommendations we think the 2025 council may want to consider relate to balancing power and authority across the districts. These include requiring the council president and vice president to represent different districts and requiring each council member council committee to have at least one member, but no more than 2 members from each district. Next. So the second policy choice asks if the council meeting schedule needs to be altered. Currently, city council meets Wednesdays at 9:30 a.m. and as necessary, Wednesday and Thursday afternoon. The 2025 council will be largely new, which means we're assuming that there might be some that have been councilors before. And we need to balance developing good working relationships with a clear understanding of their roles as councilors. Next slide, please. So in addition to full council meetings, they will also need to establish and be working in committees. Therefore, our team proposes establishing a minimum number of meetings per month for council to start its work, with the understanding that they can meet more frequently if necessary. Additionally, evening meetings increase accessibility and equity of access to council for community members that work during the day and are typically unable to attend council. It will be important for the schedule of council meetings to allow for a timely flow of legislation between council and committees and increased public engagement. We recommend the future council track the effectiveness of this cadence of their full and committee meetings and make adjustments as necessary. This will be a little bit of an iterative process. So now I'm going to pass it to Diana to present on the final 2 policy choices for now and next steps.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Diana Shiplet. I use she, her pronouns. I am a project coordinator, and actually my specialty on the team is matching city code with city charter. So I'll be before you quite a lot, I think. So the third, next slide, please. The third set of policy choices centers around voting requirements. The Portland City Charter explicitly outlines a section of voting requirements. So those have been set for the 2025 council, and they're listed on bottom of page 2 of the policy document we gave you earlier. However, there are several voting thresholds that are not set in charter. Where the charter is silent, what voting requirements should be established in code? Next slide. Currently, Code 3.02 outlines voting thresholds for several other council actions. In updating the code, we want to also update those in updating the code, should we also update those thresholds to better align with the expanded council? Or should we match them with should we use Robert's Rules of Order instead? Here you can see the first of 2 pages of first of 2 slides outlining the different possible actions. For example, resolutions, reports, and land use planning order would take an affirmative vote of 7. Calling the question or referring the item to a committee would be a majority present, which may possibly be less than 7. Removing an item from consent agenda would be 1 counselor or 1 member of the public. That's current standard practice, so nothing has changed there. Next slide. And here are some of the other ones. The council would retain the ability to suspend rules if necessary, as well as to hold special meetings or emergency meetings with the vote counts pretty similar to how they currently are, only the numbers are raised to match with the current council numbers as well. Again, we are still debating whether it's useful to outline them in code or whether it's would be more useful just to say Robert's Rules of Order takes the day. Next slide. And on this slide, you'll be able to see there are additional recommendations that should be considered as appropriate, should be considered for this, whether we should consider them for this year's update or whether recommendations should be made to the 2025 council to consider. And these things have to do mostly with the committee process. So what happens if an item gets stalled out in committee? How do we move it to the regular council meeting? What happens if you have a tie vote in committee? What's the process for sending a tie vote item on council to the mayor for his tie breaking ability? Those are the sorts of things that we're still contemplating and still trying to figure out best practices. And assuming that the 2025 council probably is the best to make those decisions. Next slide. The 4th area that we're discussing tonight asks, in what ways does the management of city council need to be altered? As we discussed, with so many new councilors beginning office for the first time ever and under a new form of government, having some basic structures and rules of procedure in place to support the council's success is important. Next slide. On this slide, you'll see 3 fundamental council actions that we have identified as helpful to define in code to provide a framework under which council can begin their operations in 2025. Although once elected at the first council meeting, the council president will preside over council, it's not clear who will preside over council in advance of that crucial vote. So we are proposing that the council clerk, with the assistance of legal counsel, act as the presiding officer until the president is elected. For voting order, we are recommending that votes be called in order of district by numerical number, then by alphabetical order of the last name of the council member in the district. And each quarter, the beginning district is rotated to the end. This is very similar to how it currently works. The rotating of the council members, commissioners now would be a very similar process. And finally, to balance the council president's authority in helping finalize the agenda, We are recommending that a majority present approve the agenda at the start of the meeting. And a majority may also agree to add an agenda item to the next council meeting. Next slide. A few additional policy recommendations we have started to consider are related to the council meetings, which include process for council to create or disband committees, both standing and for those for special projects. A process for which the mayor could be expected to attend council meetings for things such as breaking ties, giving the annual state of the city, presenting their initial budget, when they can come to present proclamations or ceremonial resolutions that are best suited to occur at council. Also, the process for regular reporting from the city councilor, or city administrator or appropriate staff on the work of the city. And again, if there are other policies or processes that we should be researching or developing recommendations for, please note them for our discussion later. Next slide. Finally, we have a few topics which don't fall neatly into any of our current policy choices, but we do think that they are important enough that recommendations should be made to the 2025 council for their consideration. These include long-term decisions regarding meeting schedules, including committee meetings, as well as regular council meetings. The transition team has also identified the need for input from the community in order to provide the 2025 council with clear recommendations for how and when and in what form council takes public testimony. We also recognize the need to develop full recommendations around the operations and potential areas of focus for council committees and subcommittees. And finally, we know that most proclamations are now under the authority of the mayor, but also recognize that there are many that might of ceremonial nature, which might better be suited to be part of council meetings. So next slide. Here's just a quick reminder of our next steps, which we mentioned earlier in the presentation. We're looking to partner with you on the August community engagement session and to take the input received tonight at that engagement session and at your August 14th meeting in order to finalize the code update, which is currently scheduled for September 20th. We also plan to continue working with you over the winter and spring to develop a set of additional recommendations for consideration of the 2025 council. That's the end of our slideshow. So we now open it up to you guys to ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you for your patience and listening.
Yeah, I have a couple questions for policy one. You talked about the council president being a person that would help decide what goes on the agenda. Have you talked about the change criteria for what would be considered on the agenda? I assume it would not be the same since the council is going to be primarily a policymaking body.
We have talked about that a lot, and we've had some input from our city attorney's office. Much of what is currently on the council agenda will not be on a future council agenda. For example, contracts will not be on there unless they alter the budget. So most contracts aren't going to show up on a council agenda. But a lot of the land use planning stuff is still going to be there. Obviously, any policy choices around changing code or updating the way the city functions policy-wise at a high level would still be on the council agenda.
Will that be part of the code or is that some different document?
I believe that's outlined in the charter.
Wouldn't that be an important piece for you to include in the first policy?
You know, generally speaking, those things aren't outlined in code what comes to an agenda because it's generally outlined in charter. So they don't then get reestablished in code. We try and keep them in one or the other.
But you bring up a great point. It will definitely be part of our onboarding materials and
Or people that are wanting to run for the council. Yes. Your
but
bureau,
also probably for staff.
bureau directors would be interested in that too. I see.
Exactly. Yeah.
The second also involves the first one. When you talked about no more than one district person on these committees, the implication is the council people are primarily there to represent a district. And I guess I would at least argue that they're there to represent the good of the city. Is that kind of role of the council person up for grabs, or how would that be talked about?
Well, I was just gonna clarify. I think we said at least one and no more than two.
Right.
For each committee, and that's for consideration. That's still, open, of course. But it's just a fact that the members of council will no longer be elected citywide. They will be elected by district. And so we're just respecting that there is a chance that they're going to be representing the interests of their district often. We do, you can assume that people that want to get into this work want to represent the interest of the broader city. So that's a safe assumption as well.
I think you said both things. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is if you wanted to attract city council candidates, what would be the message? That you're representing the entire city or that you're representing your district? Seems pretty foundational.
I think it's both. I think you are representing the city, but you also are paying specific attention to the needs of your own district. So for example, I can imagine that a council member would have town halls citywide, and they would also have town halls within the district in order to fully understand the needs of their constituents, because those are the people who elect them. And part of why we were choosing to say each district should be represented on a committee, but maybe not everybody from the district should be on a committee, was that we didn't want any one district to be overly powerful within a committee. So if you have 3 members of a district in one committee and only 1 member from any other district, then obviously the district's needs are going to trump the citywide. So that's why we were trying to balance the power across the city.
I guess what I'm trying to say is when you have a description of what you want out of a city council person, I think you ought to be explicit about how you're coming down on that. If you're saying both, then that's fine. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not here to argue one way or the other, but
Yeah, no, that's fair.
okay.
I did want to clarify that we won't be creating job descriptions for city council members. There's not a precedent for that anywhere, and HR has confirmed that we will not be doing that for elected officials. However, I think you're correct to point that out for materials that we're releasing about what it means to run and what it means to serve as a city.
Sorry, but that's a more interesting question for me because I thought city council people were primarily policymaking body. So that has to be part of a job description, doesn't it?
There's no, other cities don't have job descriptions for city councilors. It's an interesting
Okay.
thought though, yeah.
Terry?
Yeah, I have a ton of questions on some of this stuff, and I will certainly send them to you. But I'm also just kind of deeply concerned about a couple of the very big philosophical things that seem to be undecided. And a lot of it comes around 2 things: the role of the council president and then how committees work. And I worry with some of the policy choices that you suggested that you're trying to balance things, and I understand that. But in doing so, I think you're creating scenarios where you can reach a gridlock, where there's no way out. For example, if you have the entire council decide who goes on committees, they could be doing that for weeks. Whereas, typically in a legislature, the Speaker of the House or the President of the Senate will make those choices. And if there are objections to that, Robert's Rules of Order has a way to handle that. But it gets off of dead center. And so I worry about trying to balance too much when legislatures around the country have handled this for hundreds of years at this point. So that's one thing. But the role of the council president And what that staff looks like, I think is really important, and we have no idea what that is.
Yeah.
Will the council president have a legislative director? Will there be a parliamentarian? These are sorts of things that come packaged with that position normally, and we'd have to consider how that works in order to know how the code gets written. And then likewise with the committees themselves, legislatures have ways of running committees and passing legislation that seem to work. To reinvent rules may be more than you want to take on. And why not use, rather than Robert's Rules of Orders, you use Mason's Manual for legislation. So anyway, I think there's so much work to be done, and to have that done by August so that you can put it out to the public is going to be tough.
Sorry, can I interject there?
Yeah. I mean, sure.
I would say that we do not want to tackle all of that by August. I think that's the point, is I think we recognize that there are so many important considerations here and possibilities. And what we have heard is that we don't want to make too many choices in advance of the 2025 council. And so we have taken all of that in and realized, well, maybe it's best that we continue to collect all of this input and research all of these very deeply complicated issues and provide, summaries and recommendations to that new council, so that when they get there, if deciding on committees with the full council isn't working, they can change that. We have that ability as outlined in the charter.
To Wynn's, the public comment from Wynn earlier, what is what is driving this fall deadline? What exactly do you need to have done this fall that can't wait? And to answer a little bit to your response, I could see the way to get candidates engaged is to create a really good package that is very detailed, that turns into basically a campaign issue for candidates to address. Do you support the package? Do you not? Do you like this list of committees that we've come up with, or would you do something different? I mean, I think that's really interesting campaign material that would engage the city, but I don't understand what needs to be done this fall.
There certainly are things that need to be in place before a council starts. We can't expect the council to start January 1 without a base of some of these things codified. And we are eminently worried that the later we wait to codify some of this, the more political they become. So having them now before they become entirely politicized, and still allowing us to research and deeply understand the things that we want the future council to take on and consider is very important. And that's why we are timing it now versus a year from now. Because a year from now, when it's, for lack of a better word, silly season, we don't want to be bringing it before a council at that point in time. We want it done prior to that. So, yeah. Great comment.
Leah?
Thank you. Leah Benson here. I have a few questions, but out of respect for the other people here, I'll ask one, then put the rest in comments. My question has to do with community engagement. I want to make sure that I'm understanding the different phases that you laid out. So in August, we're going to have a listening session, and then they're going to be presented. But then there's that whole November to June period. That's the phase 2 for additional, what's the difference between the August and then the rest of it? And how do we expect to gather information?
Well, my initial answer to that will be there is so much work to be done, and we've really focused on figuring out summer engagement and engagement this year. And so we don't know what that engagement looks like, and we definitely want to hear from you on that. We know that this is a topic that some people are really interested in, some people aren't very interested in. Agile to like respond to what the community wants to give input on, because there's so much with transition. It's a fantastic opportunity, but we don't want to over plan that engagement if it's not what people are looking for.
Which is great to hear. And I just, the one clarifying question that I have is, do people have until June to provide comment to it? Or are the decisions actually being made before then?
For the phase 2, yes, they will have time for then, because I don't think that we will have a complete packet of the phase 2 recommendations until September of 2024, somewhere in there. And so, yes, they have plenty of time to engage on the phase 2 stuff.
Okay, thank you.
Amy. Amy Rendell.
You're on mute.
Okay, great. Thank you. Just opening the window here. Yeah, I wanted to echo comments from earlier tonight. I, as somebody who's worked in the legislative and campaign space, see this as an opportunity for political consultants to very much understand how to run a campaign using these rules, and regular people very much not being able to understand how to use these rules. And that gives me a lot of pause. In particular, a few different things. One, the staffing. I, as a person running a campaign, would need to know how that person's going to be staffed in order to coach that person about how to run their campaign. It's going to look very different how you would run this office if you have staff versus not having staff. So for me, that needs to be included in this initial communication to candidates. We won't be doing our job unless there's that. Also, we haven't seen more information if there's more that could be shared about what that staffing will look like. And also within the districts, are each of them going to be staffed? Is there going to be district staff and then each to the individual? Are they going to be expected to share that? Are they going to be working together? Because all of that has extremely loud political implications and would completely determine how somebody would interact with this committee or with this council. Second, the parliamentary procedure aspect, having these specific details, I would advocate against deviating. I would advocate that we go Robert's rules, or at least some kind of standardized program, for the simple reason that it's learnable, and that the more we sort of have specific hard rules, the more it's going to be the only political consultants know how to use this system. And then I think that's it. The question I'm interested in responses on the staffing question.
Thank you, Amy. And I'm glad you brought this up again, because I meant to respond to it before and just got lost in everything. So staffing is a very complex question, very important, as you identified. We are hoping to really dig more deeply into this. We've already started to think about it quite a bit, but it gets very complicated when we start to think about the budget. And, you know, we have 5-person council now, and it will be larger. So we are working to continue to understand how the roles of council change and understand how that changes their staffing needs. And so we are working with our colleagues that work on the budget, work on council offices budgets now. Also need to think about things like technology and what kind of support they need from technology facilities. There are a lot of moving pieces to that. So we're engaging our internal subject matter experts on these things to figure out exactly what we need to figure out when, and try to make our recommendations that's based on all the best practices we've done, the research on peer cities. It's typical for other cities with mayor council forms of government to have 2 to 4 staff to support them. And it is a lot more focused on policy and different things like that. So we'll be presenting that to council. We're going to try to provide a budget neutral option if that's possible, and then show, how that would evolve based on different options. So we're hoping to provide those options, and that's a discussion that will happen, in a public forum. And we'd love to, as soon as we know when we can.
What is
have
the
those options.
timetable for that though? Because how can that go out at such a different, like, is that going to go out at the same time that this stuff is going to go out for candidate education? Or how are we going to ensure that candidates know that when they're stepping into this?
So we're currently, I think, scheduled to report to council on that in October. So we need to figure out what the timeline is between now and then for that, for sure. Yeah, it's a great comment. Noted. Thank you.
Amy, Joe?
I understand that you don't want to put the job description of individual counselors into code, but it seems to me that there are some elements of their roles, responsibilities, limitations, accountability that deserve to be codified. For example, one of the main reasons to have district representation is constituent relations. And it seems to me that there's a lot of opportunities to overstep, and that some of those limitations might merit putting into code. Similarly, relationship with staff and administration, individual counselors, and maybe even some of their relationships with one another.
I was going to say the relationships between council and the executive side, so the mayor or city administrator, it's actually clearly outlined in charter that they can't interfere at all with the executive side of things. So the charter does outline that relationship. Not 100%, obviously, but it does speak to what they cannot do.
Yeah, so no, I was like, oh, I know that the charter actually outlines the council cannot. It says the council must not exercise any of the executive and administrative powers granted to the mayor by this charter. That's section 2-104. And so that is specifically in the charter, which is, it's helpful. Not everyone's going to read the whole charter, but we have learned from our conversations with other cities like Minneapolis that have gone through similar transitions to this, that is a really hard cultural norm to break. And we are definitely talking about that. Another hat I wear on the transition team is with the city organization project. You'll hear about more, I think, on July 10th, and you've already heard some about it. So I'm working with the administrative service area as a strategic lead, and it's something we talk about a lot in that group, because you have bureaus like the Office of Government Relations and the City Attorney's Office that are serving all of these leaders. And so they know they're expecting lines of communication are going to get complicated. And so we're thinking about these things and how best to prepare for them. It's partially going to be onboarding materials. It's partially we're thinking, are there other things we can do to support this, and just make sure that we don't want to punish counselors for reaching out to individual staff, but we are going to need to provide some guardrails. And one thing might be establishing a single person or department that they can go to when they have issues, and how they do want to reach out, communicate with the executive branch. Does that make sense?
All of that makes sense. I'm glad you're thinking about it. And, some of that may deserve to be in code. But the other two elements are relating to constituents and interaction among counselors, which I hope you're similarly thinking about.
Definitely. You're right. We're thinking about that as well. I'm working with a lot of really smart executives that are already thinking about all these things. Yeah.
Fred?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Very complex. I want a secretary's suggestion that you look at Masons, because I've got a copy if you want. Okay.
We've heard that suggestion before. We were worried that it's a little more
It's legislative.
legislative.
Yeah. But for instance, your one slide on how does the council pull something out of a committee? There's a procedure for that in Mason's. I'm not sure there is in Robert's order. Plus your comparison between the option one and then option two is suspended, just use Robert Rules of Orders. If there's a difference, I think you should enumerate that in your slide so that people know what you're suggesting otherwise. Another question I had was on, you had a quasi judicial decision of a land use decision and that had to be researched further. It seems like statute requires under land use decisions of the governing body, the appeal would go from the hearings officer to probably not the administrator, but to the council. And that then a simple majority of those present would suffice. I mean, I don't know why it's a different procedure.
Yeah, some of them are like majority and some of them are like 2/3.
All the land use
Land
decisions,
use,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, haven't lobbied we've done land use law for many decades.
Same.
I'm not even sure I remember all the elections laws. But then I would just say in regards to representing your district, half the new council's going to have to be up for, if they want to, be up for reelection in just 2 years. So they'll want to represent at least the voters of their district. I would say, in addition to representing their district, they serve the city. And I think that's an important message to send, that you're a public servant and you're serving the city as a whole. You may well be representing your constituents.
Yeah, very well put. Agreed.
Bonnie?
Sorry. Just a couple zooming out questions. Who are the peer cities that you all are using? You keep referring to best practices, so that'd be really great to know and be a part of this, particularly for the community engagement piece. And then from the peer cities, are all these details that you're seeing in best practices codified, or is the detail of the code that you all have shared tonight mostly just based on the charter amendments and not necessarily what the peer cities are doing? I'm just curious about the comparison and the need for all of this to be codified.
I can send you the full list of the people that the cities we've used. We've used cities that are both mayor council and strong mayor council and like every form of government, just because some cities have little bits of information that are really useful despite not having our form of government. So we've been comparing to a lot. It's interesting because many of the cities don't codify their rules and procedures. They do an annual like rules and procedures document that they don't codify, but they do by resolution or some other form at the beginning of every year. And that is certainly something that we can recommend to a future council. But for the moment, we need to at least establish enough that they can start. And if our recommendation is you should move away from it being codified and instead move to this policy document that is reviewed every single year and agreed upon by the majority every single year, that's certainly something we can look into. That was the one interesting bit I found. So thank you for that question. I will send you the list of everybody through Julia though.
And just curiosity, if you could just voice over the peer cities, are they similar to size to Portland or vary?
Yes. I tried to match similar in size, similar council size, similar land mass, some having similar like what they what the city manages, like do they have a public works area? Do they manage water bureaus? So it's those sorts of things. So some of them off the top of my head, Washington, DC is one of them, San Jose, Seattle, Minneapolis, Philadelphia is a little bit larger and a little bit unique. Denver City and County, they're different, but have some really interesting things to look at. Baltimore is a pretty frequent one that we use. So I will, again, send the full list of everything to Julia.
Zach?
Yeah, so I am aware of the absence of city administrator and mayor in these, and I'm just kind of curious, the suggestion of having a council president preside over is quite a large responsibility. And often, going to, I think Amy's point was just like needing to know staff, needing to know like the kind of responsibility and how much support that person's getting would be interesting to explore. And, most of my relationships and experiences with smaller cities, but often, a city administrator or potentially the mayor could be a presider of council. I realize that might not be allowed in charter, but it is like a impartial or somebody who can predominantly be the facilitator and know the ins and outs of the role. And so I just throw that out there as like, I don't know if that's even a possibility with how the charter works, but also it should be thought of as a really large responsibility that should have requisite resources.
Absolutely. No, that's a great comment. Thank you for that. I will clarify that the charter states that the council president preside over council.
Yeah.
And so that has been already established for us. But it's a great comment. We actually did our research for the salary commission to see if it meant the council president should have a higher salary. But what we saw in other cities is that does not happen, but they have more staff. So but everyone that pointed out the extra staff support was right on. And that's something we'll be looking at with the staffing plan.
And additionally, our city attorney is the parliamentarian for the city. So they help follow along the rules. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Even though you're thinking about code, the great unwashed of our community is really wanting to know and I know that you don't want to write a job description, but I think everybody out there, all of the citizens would like to know, what do city commissioners, or what have they done in the past? How have they spent the time working on it? And now that we've even got more people, what are they going to do? And you can say that it's actually in your bigger document, but I think that you've created lots of wonderful materials where you've done compares and contrasts to help educate. And I encourage you to do that. I encourage you to do that because I think that even if I was a noble citizen and I wanted to run as a city councillor, I would want to know a little bit more because I've lived here for almost 50 years and I know what commissioners do. I don't know what councillors are going to do. And I think that we want the best people, and the only way you can get the best people if they're clear about what it is that they're going to do on a day-to-day basis. And my summation is that when I used to want to call Commissioner Fritz, who had Parks and Recreation, she could never get back to me because she was too busy, putting out fires with parks. So if in fact this is constituent relationship, what will that person do? If they're not running parks, can they get message to the manager and get an answer back? So I do think that when we go out on the road and start to talk to people, I just got an earful from somebody that I bumped into that I was telling them doing this work, and they go, why do we need 3? Why are we spending all of this money? What's the benefit of 3? What are they going to do? What is it going to be better for me? So we're going to get those questions. So I know you want to steer away from a job description, but we got to talk to people about what was done in the past.
Absolutely. And yeah, that's a great comment. Sorry, were you finished?
I'm done.
No, that was a great comment. And I'm eager to respond. We just met with our communications colleagues earlier today and talked about doing exactly that and developing materials and what would be most useful. And so that's super helpful to hear. And you gave us some kind of added detail to that.
Even if you could throw it on the webpage before the listening session, which a lot of us are going to come to and help do that so that you can at least refer to that.
Will we see those materials that you're developing?
I can't.
Will We see the
We're very
materials.
early on in the process. So yeah, we'd love to share them with you and get your feedback.
Okay. And what is your assumption now about whether city council people will respond to constituent issues?
So I thought that was an interesting one. We have been thinking about that a lot because with city councilors not being so tied to those day-to-day operations, the idea, I believe, was for them to have more ability to connect with their constituents and their communities. And if someone in the community is having an issue with, I think we talked about a pothole today, like they're no longer gonna call a counselor about an individual pothole, but they could call a counselor and talk about the policy about frequency of repaving streets or the lack of funding to fund the repaving of streets. It's gonna be at a higher level that's more policy oriented.
So picking up on both what their questions are, how are you going to lay that out, the distinction in way that
Figure out.
citizens will be able to understand?
That's exactly the challenge we have ahead together.
And we will see that too.
Yeah, we'd love to have your help with that. Yeah.
And it's not just the documents or whatever, it's also how can we robustly increase our 911 program? What are the other things, the extenuating things that we need to put into place so that council isn't the one answering the question about the individual pot.
I yield to my colleague
Yeah,
on
I
my
mean,
left here.
I hate to jump in maybe out of order, but they are going to call their counselor about a pothole. When I've got a pothole, I'm not going to call the Transportation Bureau or the city administrator. I'm going to call my counselor, and there need to be very clear guidelines for what the responsibilities of that counselor are when I call. Because as far as I'm concerned, I put the city on notice.
And what the council offices, we need to be able to get the council offices enough information so that they then know
their response.
who to send it to, who to get the response from, how to help. Yes, you are entirely correct.
Yeah.
And also how to document the call and what they've done and, yeah, I mean, whether that's in code or wherever it is, it needs to be really clear what the expectations are.
There will be some growing pains. There's no way that we're gonna do this.
Yeah.
There will be growing pains, but hopefully we can make it as smooth as possible.
Are there any other questions? Did you have any closing?
There's some more.
Oh, there's more. I'm sorry. Oh, more came up.
Go ahead, Fred.
Yeah, about the listening session, and it's not just this one, but the others. Jamie we had a working group started and she had a plan and she made a presentation to GTAC and then came to a subsequent meeting, said it was all kind of up in the air. Let's revise that community outreach communications plan. Is there one still in the, is she still working on one that will help us with these listening sessions? Like where they're going to be, how they're going to be advertised, how GTAC members are, the listeners involved, et cetera?
I don't know if Julia can answer that question better than me.
I can answer sorry, this is Julia. And just for context, so the city organization and future service improvements area of work was initially thinking of having its first community listening session at the end of June, and instead has decided late July is a better time. So we'll reach back out to anyone who wants to help plan that. It's also on the volunteer sign up sheet.
Joe?
Oh, my hands.
Okay. Amy?
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate what's been said in the comments. And again, is that whether or not we think that people are going to use constituent services, people are conditioned to use them in a certain way and they do not understand jurisdiction. So to make this plan with the thought that people will call in and put up with the fact that somebody would not have that answer is really misguided. And I just want to really be extremely vocal that constituent services need to have a very clear path forward. And that needs to be very integral in the communication, both on the candidate side. This is the staff, this is the expectation. And on the like planning code side, like that needs to be built in.
And also, we gotta keep in mind that as much as we want the counselors to be city focused in any way, they're still elected by district. So if they're not providing for their district isn't gonna re-elect them. So there is a level of that has to happen, right? They have to care for the people that are their constituents. Whether we say to do it or not, it's gonna happen because they're gonna want to be.
Yeah, thank you.
And you have one. Go ahead, Destiny.
Thank you. And also Destiny, and also to Jose's point, they're going to be elected by their constituents, their district, and for them not to acknowledge the service issues or anything like that, to say you're just focused on policy at a citywide level and not have any direct communications or feedback or any way to address their district, it's not responsive of why this charter is even happening, right? Like this new government, we want a government that's representative and active towards our neighborhoods and our communities. That's the heart and the soul of it all.
Sure, and that's part of trying to make sure that the council has the tools in place to be able to direct or redirect policy to the appropriate.
Yeah, definitely.
But yes.
Terry.
Yeah, I want to back all the way out just for a second. Because I'm concerned about GTAC's ability to engage in this at this point. This schedule's moving right along. You guys have code to write. I have questions that I'd like to engage on and get answers from the transition and engage the public some more on what I think are really complicated policy questions that are being posed by this code rewrite. So I sent an email to the chairs about creating a work group or doing something, but I feel at this point kind of strongly that we need to do that, because this is more work than we can do if we're waiting 2 or 3 weeks and have a whole nother topic discussion to occur. So anyway, I'm throwing that out there live and in person, that I think we need a work group on this.
Second the motion.
It's one of those more a statement than a question, but I guess it's a question.
Okay, we have actually had a conversation around that, Terry, about what work groups that we're gonna start working to put together. We're still kind of in the planning phase of it. The code is definitely gonna be one of them that I'm aware of. If that helps at all.
Big subject.
Are there any more questions before we move on? Go ahead.
When you say the code would be one of them, I heard Terry talking about both the need to focus in on it, but also being able to do this in a timely way. So are you thinking of setting up work groups sooner rather than
Yes.
later?
Yes, yeah, we've already have sort of, maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but we have a basic outline already kind of forming, if you will. It's coming. It is coming.
Right.
Yeah.
Main thing is we wanted to see how tonight went.
Yes.
And also need to talk to staff to see how to best support that.
When you say code, are you talking about all of the adjustments that have to be made to the municipal code in order to make a successful transition to January 2025? Or are you talking about the code adjustments that need to be made to 3.02?
3.02. So.
Okay, thanks. 'Cause it's council roles and responsibilities.
That's the big one right there.
Yeah. Obviously. Yeah. Good. Okay.
Okay, go ahead, Amy.
I would just second what Terry said of the timeliness of this, especially if September is going to be a big communication in juncture. There's so much content here that requires really close, careful conversation for us to even understand before we even get input. So I would just advocate for what Terry said of having that committee, whether it's different or this in the structure, abide by the timeliness of the issue.
Thank you, Amy. Okay, any other questions or input before we move on? No? Okay. Can we get the next slide, please? So next steps. I'm gonna close this meeting out and first things first, the recording of this meeting will be posted on the committee's website as per normal. The community engagement work group meets Monday, June 26th. At what time, guys? At 6. Okay, so Monday, June 26th at 6 p.m. Okay, our next full committee meeting is scheduled for Monday, July 10th from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. And if you haven't already, please remember to first add your name to the volunteer sign-up sheet for work this summer. Please note that the district commission has chosen to do 8 in-person public hearings plus 2 virtual public hearings. The in-person locations are on the sign-up sheet if you want to volunteer for hearings in particular areas around the city. And then secondly, add organizations and your connections to the organizations to the spreadsheet. And third, submit any feedback on the draft engagement plan to Lori, Julia, or myself by this Thursday. And next slide, please. Okay. So this is like our proposed upcoming schedule. Our next meeting, of course, again, is on July 10th. We have 2 primary agenda items. We will consider recommending the engagement plan to the Chief Administrative Officer for adoption. And we will spend the bulk of the meeting having our presentation and discussion on city organization and future service improvements area of work. Okay, so on July 18th, we will receive a training on being a public officer. I'm sorry, hold on, guys. Okay, on July 18th, we will receive a training on being a public official by the city attorney's office. I should have brought my reading glasses. I do apologize to everybody for that. So we will debrief on June 29th council work session and take a deep dive into the transition budget and discuss measures of success. And then several committee members have recommended different subcommittees or work groups. We would like to tie them to upcoming work. There will be a time-limited work group on transition budget and success measures. This will probably be a couple of meetings. Please let Lori, Julia, or myself know if you're interested in being a member of that work committee. There may also be some ongoing work beginning in the fall around both change management and voter education. And please note that we now have meeting dates scheduled through November, and all scheduled meetings are posted on the Transitions webpage. Okay. Without further ado, we are going to go ahead and adjourn this meeting. Oh, hold on.
So I just want to say that speaking for myself, this is the first meeting that has felt like we're really working as a group. I think that you guys deserve a lot of credit. You've done a ton of work, obviously, and it shows, and we're benefiting from it. And you two really, I think, did exactly the right presentation and welcomed exactly the right discussion. And as I say, this is the first time that I've sort of thought, you know, we're starting to hit our stride.
Totally. That's true. Nice comment.
That's great. Thank you. Okay. Well, without further ado, I believe that we are now adjourned.